The world is evolving at a faster pace than ever before, and as we begin the path to recovery after worldwide disruption, this podcast explores how the design industries can adapt to changing expectations and create a better future for both your businesses and your consumers. I'm Bethan Ryder, you're listening to Create Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 36 of the Create Tomorrow WGSN podcast, which I've been very much looking forward to because it's all about sex. At WGSN, we've published a few reports recently on the site around the shifts and strategies in selling sex on Insight, sexual wellness on Beauty, and inclusive sex tech on our recently launched consumer tech platform. It's always been a hot topic, but what's exciting is that the sexual conversation is expanding and there's a shift towards more open, honest and diverse conversations, depictions and explorations of sex and sexuality from a multiplicity of viewpoints. So with me here to discuss why this is happening and what it means for brands and consumers are some of our WGSN experts. We've got Nick Paget, Senior Strategist on Menswear. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Bethan. How are you?
Very good. I'm looking forward to this. And we've got Claire Varga, our Head of Beauty. Hi, Claire.
Hello. I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you.
And over in the US, we've got Caitlin Monahan, a strategist on consumer tech. Hi, Caitlin.
Hey, Bethan. Thanks for having us.
Okay, so I want to start really by talking about why we think this landscape shifted and changed and what the social drivers are behind it. And I think I'll come to you, Nick. I know we've touched upon on our reports about this move towards gender inclusivity, the Me Too movement. What do you think? What do you see happening, and why are we kind of loosening up a bit, if you like, about sex?
Yeah, it's massive, isn't it? It's a huge deal to talk about because I think particularly for men that it's like this acceptance that we're going to start to talk about something that is usually in a hyper-masculine sphere. You're only allowed to say that, firstly, that you really love sex, secondly, that you're really good at it, thirdly, probably that you've got a really huge penis. It's like there are so many reasons why men could feel inhibited to talk about sex. And finally, some of those things are starting to be broken down. And I think there are some things happening in tandem, right? So there's, people are more... particularly men are more able to talk to other men, and particularly other, gay, maybe they're gay men, and have much more frank and honest conversations that, that wouldn't have been able to happen before. So, and I think it's because it's kind of enabled by the fact that men are talking much more about their mental health, their emotions in general, fashion, everything has stopped, they've stopped being topics that are no-go areas for men, because they're starting to stop just being two-dimensional characters, and they're starting to live much more authentic lives, which is better for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly I would say a big nod to Sex Education, the TV show, which to me, I think our report about sex positivity came out really and drew upon that same kind of positive view of all the ways and kinks of sex that people can have. Brilliantly, and even more brilliant that the two of the main characters are a straight guy and a gay guy, right? Talking about things. I haven't let my daughter watch it yet, but I like to think that this Gen Z generation are really embracing and pushing this. Claire, you are on Beauty. You talked a lot about sort of the touch starvation during the pandemic. Do you think we're seeing part of this as well as a kind of like liberation from our sort of touch starvation during lockdowns?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there's one thing that became apparent during the pandemic, it was just how important, touch or being touched is, and that, sexual wellness is a really essential part of our self-care. And I think that's what we're seeing now. It's a move away from conversations just around sex to sexual health and sexual wellness, and it's a recognised form of a very important self-care. I mean, the category was growing really heavily before the pandemic, but obviously it is one of those categories that's been really accelerated by the pandemic. we all had a lot of time on our hands. There's no doubt about it. So, but one of the things that gave us was it allowed people to sort of experiment and rediscover things and really just explore their own intimate well-being, and whether that was on their own with other people, whether it was in real life or virtually, but there was a lot of exploration going on. So, as I said, I think it really helped us understand the importance of sex and sexual wellness in terms of both physical and mental well-being, and that really changed the sort of narratives that were going on around sex towards the importance of intimacy and pleasure and joy. It became quite a joyful thing, and I think, Nick sort of alluded to it as well, that there is that, a lot of the stigma and the nudge, nudge, wink, wink sort of conversations around, sexual wellness products. They've sort of gone away, and we're sort of now seeing brands, explore and help people explore and sort of discover things in a very safe, very welcoming and very inclusive environment. So it's been a real interesting time, actually.
One of our stats actually is that the sexual wellness market will potentially reach a global value of $125 billion by 2026. So it's clearly a category for people to think about. In fact, only today I was listening to Radio 4 on my dog walk, and they were discussing advent calendars, and apparently there are sex toy advent calendars this year. And the brilliant thing about them is that they are inclusive and they are for every type of sexual persuasion.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the fact that, people are, this sort of normalising sexual wellness products, and it's also like putting them on par with all your other everyday essentials, so on par with shampoo or your favourite moisturiser, and they're not these things to be, whether it's a product or a toy or anything, they're not things that are sort of hidden in the bedside drawer anymore. They're pretty shelfie worthy, braggable, covetable products. They're designed to be on show and discussed, and I love that about this whole area.
And is there a part of this as well, for brands to gain loyalty and devotees, an element of sort of education too in some of their marketing around sort of sex, being positive about sex? Are you seeing things in that space? I don't know, Nick, if you're seeing things talking to the male consumer there.
I think the single most notable one that I can think of is how Grindr, the gay dating app, has been used to debut fashion shows. J.W. Anderson kind of led the charge with this back in 2016 when he, I don't know if it was instead of a catwalk show, but it didn't matter because it was so headline worthy and so like putting that app on in the consciousness of people who'd never heard of it before. And just totally normalizing it. It was like, this is where my audience is, so this is where I'm going to go and sell my products. And it's kind of like, it was mind-blowing at the time. But a few designers have done it since, for sure. So that's a prime example, I think.
Claire, what about what are you seeing in that space with sort of education and brands marketing?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's really interesting. I think in beauty in general, particularly in skincare, we've had the body and skin positive movements, and we're sort of seeing this sex positive movement sort of moving over into this category, and it's all really about guilt-free exploration. It's about acceptance, and really we're seeing brands reflect the full diversity of what modern sexuality looks like. A lot of it is around understanding gender identity, and it's sort of understanding that gender identity and sexual preferences and physical anatomy sit on a very broad spectrum, and we're starting to see brands reflect this in their messaging. And they're sort of moving on this idea that sexual products or sexual wellness products are binary, and it's sort of about almost designing for the body part and need, not the gender. And I think it's really interesting. The same way anti-aging suddenly disappeared off all the products. The whole thing around feminine hygiene is another really interesting way of where the market is re-educating itself. So we've seen lots of the really big period brands and some of the new indie brands coming through who've, done away with the term feminine hygiene, and they've replaced it, with terms so that the products are usable for all people with periods, whether they're, trans or non-binary. And it's just, and I think Cake, who I probably mentioned quite a lot in this podcast, one of my favourite brands, they have when you go to navigate their site, you can go male, female, or they have fuck gender. So shop how you want is one of the other options that you can do. And I really, these brands are really sort of, it's not like an in-your-face education, but they're doing a really good job of it. But we're also, the other thing I find really interesting is that in the same way we've sort of seen the skinification of every other, beauty product, we're starting to see this move again into sexual wellness. So in the same way that dermatologists have been the, big beauty ambassadors, that people want fact and fact-backed products. So we've seen derms become, the sort of brand ambassadors. We're now seeing it happening with gynecologists. So you're seeing products that are gynecologist-backed. And there's a lot of debunking of, some of the myths and the sort of TikTok type trends and the, steaming your vagina type trends. We're seeing them being debunked and things. So yeah, there is this appetite for fact that we're seeing elsewhere, and it's coming into here, and there's some brands doing a really, really good job of just helping people navigate these sort of that might be new or different areas that they want to explore.
So good, because it's so fearful of the idea of going back to the 1950s and some sort of shame attached to like genitalia, but this is like completely breaking out of that.
There's also like there are less sort of confrontational, if you like, examples like Christopher Kane's More Joy line, where he just has like everything from pants to doormats, and they'll say the word sex or special or more joy. So they don't have to be like, it doesn't have to be like about sex toys even. It's just about placing sex in people's consciousness as just another everyday act, like, the whole normalizing thing. But it's also quite classy and sexy, and still it doesn't sort of make it boring.
Or sort of smutty. Or the little bit smut's quite fun. I like that we're we've seen this a lot in fashion, this moving away from the binary framing. Caitlin, your report on inclusive sex toys is brilliant. It's one of the reasons why we're having this chat today. And apparently 4% of the Gen Z generation identify as non-binary, transgender or gender non-conforming worldwide. I'm certainly seeing it amongst my daughter's cohort in her school. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what you're seeing there and how tech brands are moving with the times and really responding to that in their products.
So to Claire's point earlier, the industry at large is really moving away from this binary thinking in terms of traditional sex tech for cis men and cis women. So, it's widely understood now that gender doesn't dictate genitalia. And brands such as, Mod and Smile Makers and Laura DiCarlo and Dame, they're all placing focus on body parts instead of assuming the gender of the user. And I think what's really interesting is like the messaging and the language shift for the sex tech products. So, they'll say something like vulva owners instead of just women, which really helps in terms of creating that kind of fluid messaging that's accessible to everyone. And then in terms of software, there's a lot of kind of erotic audio apps and even dating platforms that are kind of backing up this same trend in hardware. So apps like Tammy, which, you can specify whether you're intersex, trans, non-binary. They're really great alternatives to Hinge and Tinder and Bumble, which do allow you to, select from a range of different genders, but then you're met with follow-up questions like, oh, but where do you want to be in the search function, men or women? Or, sometimes queer people are even like blocked from these platforms from other users for no good reason at all. And then erotic audio apps, you have something like Quinn that offer this alternative to kind of these aggressive, gnarly Pornhub narratives, which kind of opens up porn and erotic audio in a way that's like super accessible, and you can kind of see yourself and your sexual identity and your orientation in the stories themselves.
I think what's really interesting to me, slightly going off at a tangent, but I have a fear of young people learning about sex through porn because of the narrative that has been the traditional narrative of porn, which is not very good for women. But are we seeing here a change in porn narratives as well? And this is slightly off topic, but is that because I know on TV now, I'm going to be really frank, you don't really see people, you don't really see men receiving oral pleasure anymore. You see a lot of women receiving it. And that seems like a big shift culturally. My partner and I joke about it's not an on-the-button TV program anymore if there isn't a woman being given pleasure. Are we also sort of thinking that this is positive in that this sex positivity is sort of we're really seeing the dying of that traditional narrative? Do we think that, or is there a backlash potentially as well?
Well, I'll answer it because I'm similar to you in that I have a 14-year-old daughter, and it's something that I talk about. And I think for me, it sort of enabled me to talk to her about other narratives as well. And I don't think that porn or those traditional narratives are going to go away necessarily. And you could argue they couldn't. As we said, there's a very wide spectrum of what people like and enjoy. But I think what's good now is that she is able to see different narratives, whereas before that was possibly the only narrative that she was seeing. And it's enabled me to talk to her about it in a way to say, this is almost like a genre of sex, and it's allowed me to have conversations with her about it in a much more confident way, because she's already more informed than I probably ever was at that age. But there are different narratives to discuss, so for me it's been quite a help. But like you, it's in the past it was something I worried about.
There's even this, I think it's actually based out of London, it's called the clit test. Have you guys heard of it? So it's basically rating the entertainment industry, TV and film, like, was the clit acknowledged at all, like in conversation, in not obviously view, but is it a part of the narrative? And there's a whole list of like every single TV show and film that ticks the box. So maybe with that kind of benchmark, more TV shows will be taking note and trying to get on the list as well.
We've often talked about media and everything being being portrayed through the male gaze, and I think now that we have more women directors and creatives and producers, we're seeing truer narratives of things. You never see anybody clean up after sex, do you, in television programs? We're seeing more honest portrayals of what a sex is actually like, that it can be funny, it can be embarrassing, it can go wrong sometimes, it can be messy. And I think just that it's just not this one perspective anymore that I find hopeful. I'm going to say I feel hopeful about it.
I thought what was interesting as well in your report, Caitlin, and I was going to ask Nick about this, is the sort of how some of the sex toys sort of making, if you like, straight men realise that things that gay men find pleasurable, they will also find pleasurable. Like there's some sex toys that touch upon the prostate and things like that. And I think you see in that breakdown, you think that's part of it all, Nick, too, with people just getting less hung up about gay sex, straight sex for men.
Yes, it's like I said, that dialogue is allowed to be more open than it used to be. And I think, God, it's not like straight men weren't ever watching gay porn before. It's just that now that there's a there's a slight chance in the right conversation that they might admit that they do. And of course, they're experiencing things in real life that they weren't letting on they were experiencing before. It's just that now it's much more okay to talk about it, and it's creating an industry around it, obviously, rightly so. But yeah, like so many of these things, like the existence of trans people, we're just acknowledging things now, that we're acknowledging that they exist, whereas before we like to brush all this stuff under the carpet and marginalize people and leave them flapping in the wind. Whereas now, I mean, to go back to the sex education, the recent series that has just been on, no spoilers, but like it was a whistle stop tour of every kink, every gender identity, every kind of sexual relationship you could imagine. It was like they had a checklist of things they were keen to talk about and contextualize and normalize, and I think it was amazing for that. Because there is a precedent, like there have been things like Queer as Folk where you saw queer relationships. And at the time, I think it was the right way to go personally. They set out to shock. And my God, they did. I literally watched it and prayed my parents weren't watching it because I did not want to discuss it with them. But sex education is different. I'm not saying it's easy, but it doesn't set out to, stick two fingers up at people. It sets out to start a conversation.
My goodness, I sobbed in the last episode. Anyway, so let's talk about the categories of product that this is kind of leading to a bit more. In beauty, I know you've done some reports on this, Claire. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the new things? I know the menopause is out in the open a lot more now as well.
Yes.
Thank goodness.
I know, a subject very close to my heart, thank you. But yeah, it has opened up a lot of new categories. It's gone beyond sort of, lubes. That was it, wasn't it? There was sort of, that was your sexual wellness products. So, perimenopausal and menopausal products, people experiencing those, they have very specific sort of sexual needs. So there's a lot of products that help with everything from, vaginal dryness to low libido. So there's some great brands like Womanness and Taboo who are doing some really good products around that. But it's also interesting because that sort of opened it up for people, for older people as well. There's a lot of people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, still interested in sex and enjoying sex. So a lot of these products are helping people sort of continue that intimacy into later life, which is really important. We love a new beauty moment, as you know, on beauty, and I think that's one of the other things that sort of helped to come out in the pandemic as well. And there's a lot less focus on the act of sex itself. There's a lot of new products that are for sort of pre and post sex. Those are the beauty moments. So there's a lot of products that sort of help you get in the mood, and by that I don't necessarily mean aphrodisiacs, although there are a lot of functional fragrances that sort of work around that. But there's like Maud have done some great bath products that are designed, if you want to bath with somebody or shower with somebody pre-sex, so you can sort of get ready and you can wash each other. And there's some, it's just some really massage candles, just really nice products that sort of are about intimacy, that are in this wellness space. And I think, it's just people have had the time to rediscover foreplay. That time in the pandemic, we were allowed to, discover that. And as I mentioned earlier, sex can be a little messy at time. And this is some, these frank conversations have sort of opened this up as a product category. So there's a lot of, there's still going to be a lot of focus on hygiene as well. So there's some really great products that are designed to make sex, intimate and clean and safe and as discreet as possible. And so you've got brands like Future Method who have done products that are for like post-sex cleanup and things. And there's intimate wipes and again, sanitizing sprays that are designed for you to clean your toys and things post sex. So there's this sort of this pre and post thing is really interesting as well, and the conversations that are happening around that, and these products that are designed, specifically to sort of help with that, and they're very honest and very candid.
I wonder, Claire, whether the fact that lots of people have been working from home in lockdown, whether there's been some sex snacking going on as well. And people perhaps not restricting it to bedtime, but maybe there's a bit of that as well.
I couldn't possibly comment, Beth, but I'm not in any hurry.
Not any of us, obviously. We're all hard at work.
Yeah, let's just say I'm not in any hurry to go back to the office. Thank you.
I wanted to touch a little bit on talking of kind of being inclusive, that often I think that was the other thing that was great about sex education, people that are physically diverse and have different physical abilities. This assumption that they're sort of asexual is going out the window now as well, thank goodness. And I wonder, Caitlin, I think you've done some research around this. What's happening in this space?
So the World Health Organization now classifies sexual pleasure as a human right. And that's really changing the game in terms of prioritizing sex for everyone, every body, every ability. And, you know, people with mobility challenges and any sort of physical limitation have rarely been depicted at all in terms of sexual beings. And that taboo has really caused a lot of negative impact on the communities. And, you know, brands like Handy now, which create inclusive, accessible sex toys, are really changing the game. They basically did all this really amazing reporting on physical limitations and self-pleasuring and sexual pleasure, and they created this toy called the joystick, and it includes like chin control technology and also hands-free packaging, which I thought was really cool and also important. And then I was also looking at senior sex and how that's also being enhanced with different initiatives like WeVibe, and different tools that kind of take the strenuous labor out of certain toys and make it a little bit more accessible for different abilities and limitations too.
Also, I wanted to just talk a little bit, Caitlin, because you're our consumer tech specialist, about social platforms and how they're navigating this sort of opening up, because we all know that it's actually, you know, there is some censorship around these things on major platforms, because there has to be, because, you know, children have got access, etc. But what's happening, and I know there was a bit of a controversy earlier this year, right, with OnlyFans. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and the OnlyFans was a funny one because then Tyga was immediately, I'm making my star. So the consumer desire is definitely still there, and it's being fought for. But, you know, to your point, censorship is a tricky one because these big tech platforms need to be funded. And to your point, there's also children involved in viewership, so that needs to be really handled with care. You know, in terms of specific platforms, you have platforms like Make Love Not Porn and Lips, which really kind of celebrate sexual expression, and it's welcome to everyone. But, you know, what I'm thinking about now is like social platforms are going to become embodied internet, so right, the metaverse. And then if we're all avatars, like, can you sexualize a digital nipple, or can you gender it? And, you know, where do you draw the line? And I'm really curious about how like humans are going to start to interact. And you know, in my opinion, nudity will probably, and promiscuity, whatever that is, will probably be regulated for some time. But my hope is that these platforms can become and continue to be safer in terms of sex education, and a place where people can explore their own sexual expressions.
Wow, I didn't realise there were so many different platforms out there for all these different things. It's fascinating. I wonder, with talking about sort of brands getting involved with marketing and messaging and sort of being a bit irreverent, which you've already talked about, Claire, but is there a point where how do you not offend? Obviously you want to target as many, you know, consumers as possible. How do you not turn them off, so to speak?
Right.
What are your tips?
Well, you know, I think as we've been talking today, you know, humour is a great way to address these, you know, any topics in this space. And I do see a lot of sexual wellness brands using that, even with how they name themselves, you know, Quim, a word I never thought I would say out loud on a podcast. And, you know, brands like Awkward Essentials, they're sort of, you know, they're alluding to the humour and the awkward of this. And it's sort of very disarming, and it sort of takes the nervousness out of it. And I think, you know, with a lot of people, it is just, you know, they're just nervous and you know, and pretty, especially as Brits, we're very sort of, you know, uptight and prudish as well. So I think, yeah, humour is a great way of doing it. But it's still even about being very frank and very direct. It's about your language, and we talked about the importance of, education and, using, brands who partner with like so-called sexperts and gynecologists, so that, there's science and backing with their products. Cake, who I again mentioned earlier, I think they're sort of a masterclass. They're a blueprint for a brand doing this really well. They're almost a community wellness brand. They work with their consumers to help them design sex toys. They find out how people are having sex and what they do and explore everything. And they actually have designed their sex toys based on their findings. They actually have, the products have wonderful names like Tush Kush, So there's something very nice about that. And then they also have a section on their site that is about it's called Sex Ed. It's a sex education section, and they cover everything from tips on how to come out to somebody, from how to do very specific kinks or different ways of things if you've never tried it before and you're curious. They've got these very frank how-tos on how to approach it and how to do it safely or in a way that you're comfortable with. And I think as I say, they're to me a blueprint of a brand who is doing everything right in this space in terms of the way they're communicating, who they're appealing to. So that would be sort of my answer to that. Have a look at what they're doing.
I do want to touch upon the fact that we're in the UK, and some areas of the world are less open about these things. And I just wondered, it's obviously different stages of evolution in different world regions. So obviously that's a tricky one if you're a global brand, right? So Claire, what's your advice there about that?
Yeah, it is tricky for brands, and it's something that when we're writing, we're also mindful of, that we're writing for a global audience, and that we have to respect that different cultures have different attitudes towards sex. They're at different places on their journey. And in some places, there's laws and legislation in place that where certain practices are still considered illegal. So brands do have to be very aware of what's going on in the countries that they're selling in, and work within that. I think China's really interesting. I ahead of the podcast, I spoke to my colleague in Singapore about this, and she was talking about how Asia Pacific, where particularly in China, where it's been a quite conservative mindset towards sex, that's really changing, and the younger generation in China are really sort of exploring sexuality, and I think the online sexual wellness market sort of doubled year on year last year. It was up 50%, so there's a real interest in that. And I think it's around discussions of gender and freedom. But she was also saying that the change to the 3-child policy in China has also allowed people to explore more, and they're more interested in sex, even if it's just from a point of view of procreation. So she said it's a very interesting and sort of definitely tracking and going in the same way. Elsewhere as well, India saw demand for sexual wellness products go up to like 65% last year. So there's a lot happening around there. And we've also been looking at the Middle East as well, where traditionally women have very little sex education, even around their sexual health as well. But we're seeing that move on. And there's a great platform called Moj, I think it's pronounced, and they're educating women about their sexual health and their wellness. So I think what brands need to do is just, be aware of where certain countries are, where certain cultures are within their sort of sexual wellness journey. Be respectful of that. But they are a power for change, that we as brands, they can be activists and they can help move these conversations forward. So, but yeah, I think, we had the sexual revolution in the 60s. I think we're definitely in the sexual wellness revolution now, and that is a global thing that's happening.
And I just want to touch upon something that we predicted actually as part of our top trends for this year and beyond, which was we touched upon digisexuality. And I just wanted, you are our VR AR expert, Caitlin. I mean, I the possibility is slightly blowing my mind. The idea of you maybe being in an immersive, I don't know, sexy party, and you could have haptic things that meant you could feel like you were touching someone. What was going on? It sounds like there's some interesting things happening or could be happening there.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So immersive sex tech in the industry is called Teledildonics. And they're basically tools for remote interaction. And we saw this really boom during the pandemic. But, it's been around for years. There was even, I think it was 2016, the Kissinger, which was this kind of silicone platform that you could give it a little kiss and then have it virtually sent to a remote partner. Or, Bluetooth connected sex toys that can be controlled by a partner from, a distance away. And now we have the Satisfier's Love Triangle, which is a smart toy that creates multisensorial blends of sound and haptics and even has custom voice commands. But where this really kind of spices up is AR and VR, to your point. So it sounds crazy to think about these experiences coming to life, but VR porn actually accounts for 50% of the total VR market. And we're seeing brands like Raspberry Dream Labs offer multisensory experiences to be able to connect with partners from afar through kind of this simulated human touch. But one thing that I think is great about VR sex, even though it seems a little bit futuristic, is that VR sex is safer. It gives autonomy back to and safety back to sex workers because they're able to kind of, engage with their clientele in a safe way. And then it also just lets you explore, if you're someone who's bi-curious and, you're looking to have kind of a sexual experience with the same gender, but you don't, you might not be ready to do it IRL. You can hop into these different platforms and, kind of explore your desires, explore your kinks in safe and positive ways. And then going back to digisexuals, that's really where our relationships, sex, and identity intersect with technology. And as it becomes more integrated into our lives in the future, we'll look to kind of heightened extended reality experiences, to my point earlier, digital twins being sexual beings, and even the expansion of robotic relationships, which I touched on in my report, kind of touching on the fantasy that we've been talking about for decades in sci-fi movies and everything. So like brands like Gatebox and everything will probably expand more, and we're going to be seeing a little bit more kind of robotic human interaction in the future.
Fab. Is it always going to be, do we think, a remote thing? I mean, we're talking a lot on the site about experiential retail. Is there going to be a time when these two things collide? Yeah,
I mean, I think to your point, you could still use VR headsets or extended reality hardware in partnership with a physical partner. I haven't seen too many brand case studies that depict that yet, but I don't see why not. And it could, spice some stuff up. You could be animals or avatars or have different senses going on. So yeah, there's a lot there.
I guess it also does away with the, virtual sex does away with the problem of who gets the wet patch as well, There's lots of advantages I'm seeing here.
100%.
Oh my God, we need to wrap this up. That's almost the perfect thing to end on. But I did want to ask one more question, really, which is to all of you or whoever wants to answer it. If a brand or a designer is wanting to kind of create a product in this space or launch a new startup in this space, have you got some words of advice? And we'll go, I don't know, Claire, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think post pandemic, there's a lot of intimacy nostalgia going on. We're sort of looking back to those halcyon days where we could have interact quite freely, and I think there's a lot of there's an opportunity here for brands to create products that allow people to reconnect safely, and I would even include in that a lot of the brands who pivoted to produce hand sanitizers early on. I think there's an opportunity to sort of reposition products like that as a way to help us embrace this raunchy new norm that's out there and allow people to reconnect safely. Apart from that, I think, approach designing wellness products like you would any other daily essential, and make it and move away from those stereotypes and making sex binary really when you're designing.
Caitlin, have you got, if it's a sort of maybe a tech company?
Yeah, 100%. So I totally agree with you, Claire. Accessibility and inclusivity have to be, top of mind from design, user experience, packaging, and even, beta testing on as many bodies and identities as possible. And then in terms of intimacy, I don't think people kind of inherently connect technology as intimate, right? It's kind of like a dichotomy. But the sex tech industry is really changing those ideas. And I think it will be really interesting to see how tech can solve intimacy challenges. So, one interesting way could be creating this multi-sensory through AR and VR, and not only finding, what sex feels like, but, what does it smell like? What does it sound like? Like, what does it look like? All of these different things that you could kind of partner with these software platforms in order to merge these different senses into the hardware that you're offering and bringing those realities closer together.
And Nick, what about you?
I would just say that the aim should be to try not to alienate anyone as much as these probably are, to a degree, kind of specialized products. Considering a kind of bigger spectrum of masculinity that is being discussed in a lot of societies at the moment, that should enable a conversation around just creating products that are more accessible for more different kinds of men. And that, as a narrative, ought to create a better commercial opportunity. I would have assumed, really, to appeal to a wider group of consumers. Why wouldn't any brand want that?
Thank you to Nick, Claire and Caitlin for taking time to talk today. If you're a WGSN subscriber, you'll find reports covering many of the hot topics we touched upon across our platforms, from inclusive sex tech on Consumer Tech to sex-positive marketing on Insight, and several reports about sexual wellness, the new frontier in beauty on Beauty. And if you want to find out how to subscribe, head over to WGSN.com to discover how you can get access to our service. We're constantly publishing new content focusing on how we can design a brighter, better future for our industries, which include food and drink, interiors, beauty, fashion, and consumer tech. You can subscribe to the show on all the major podcast platforms, and if you like what you've heard, why not leave us a rating and review on iTunes. I'd just like to thank our producer, Roland Bodenham, who enjoyed listening in to this one this week, and we'll be back in 2 weeks for our next episode. So until then, stay well and healthy, and we'll see you next time.